Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is the Hydragons Breath Bow Wow, welcoming to you to the second Archon's anniversary. Ladies and gentlemen, we have our Homebrew tier list 2, Electric Boogaloo. It is our second Homebrew tier list. It is our celebration of the channel's 1-year anniversary. Our rebirth as a channel began on the 2nd of November. The first preparations for that video began on this day exactly 1 year ago. I cannot tell you, in fact, I could not have told you in this long stream I did this afternoon, how excited I am to show all of you my appreciation. So, just to give you a concept of what we're looking over here, we had 15 submissions for our Homebrew tier list and 12 for our engine contest. Today we are going over the tier list. Tomorrow we have the contest. There are 27 total submissions out of our 673 subscribers. That is more than double the 13 from 3 months ago in our first Homebrew tier list. And can I just say, hurrah, hooray, huzzah, and thank you very much. So, let's get into it as standard. A quick introduction for what the hell we're doing here. This is the Homebrew Drive. It is a channel showcase and an attempt to encourage people to show off their homebrew ideas. We'll be collecting stuff off of Discord and also off of posts on the channel, which I have already done. Artwork for this is on provision from the creator, otherwise it is sourced as reference material, so if you need a specific citation for that, go ahead and post a comment, but otherwise we'll be looking at just things that people have given me. Now, scoring is not meant to denigrate anyone's idea. In fact, I removed the official scoring from this system. However, I will say I have instituted a winner's bracket for both the challenge and for the homebrew of each year. I will not be showing off any grades or any numbers this year, but I will be inviting the winners to that spot. What are we judging things on? Well, we have 4 statistics, just the same as last year, and the challenge has slightly different statistics that, again, I will not be making public to anyone except for the winner of the challenge. You might be able to get a taste of it, though, by the end of that video tomorrow. The first rating for our homebrews is role fulfillment. How well does it fit into the setting or the niche of the faction it's trying to fill? Logistics, how reasonable or logical is the design? And then finally, style and flavor. Was it well thought out? Are there a lot of good ideas or details? And naturally, this is somewhat subjective. So let us get going. As usual with these videos, we are starting off with the lovely Gun Tuna's submission. Gun Tuna has given us a pair this time, which is lovely as usual. The first one is the Ordinatus Annelid Siege Engine, or Annelid. This is a Titanic worm drill engine. It is a massive Titan-sized artifice designed for deep ground and fortification breaking tunnel work, so it is a deep underground bore creature. It is designed to both tunnel under defenses or to engage with enemy god machines of a relatively large size, a la Reavers. Now, the Annelid is not necessarily designed for stealth. Matter of fact, it is basically anything, but at 62 meters long, it is an enormous construct, one of those unique Ordinatus weapons available to the Adeptus Mechanicus. Naturally, as with anything that Gun Tuna provides us, it is void shielded and heavily armored, both with adamantium and ceramite. It is designed to crawl, quote-unquote, or move, with a mix of galvanic traction drives and thrusters. The way that I could best describe this, considering its concentric metal tube construction, is basically that it squidges along. At least above ground, it moves very much like a caterpillar, or even like a ribbed snake, similar to something like a puff adder. So it is going to be moving along the ground at a relatively slow speed, around 15 miles per hour, below ground, and a little bit faster than that above. It is heavily armed, as one might expect from a creature both designed to dig through the earth and then also to engage titanic enemies. It has meltas close to its mouth, along with turbo lasers that are designed to help it tunnel and bore through the earth, essentially melting material ahead of it so that its facial consumption structure can bite into the rock, pull itself forward, and spray spoil out of its essentially gills, so to speak. In addition to that, of course, you might expect it to be armed secondarily, which it is quite heavily armed. 16 4-centimeter thermobaric autocannons on its superstructure, essentially down the length of each of its sectioned ribs and armored areas. There is a set of automated, or at least servitor-controlled, autocannons, and these are of course Guntuna's standard thermobarics that we saw last time. In addition, as you might expect from an Ordinatus weapon, it has the usual suite of Titan-level auspex. Most specifically important for the Aneliad is its ability to see through and above the ground, and to connect various levels of auspex system so that it knows what and how to target things while it is still submerged within the earth. My overall review of this Ordinatus weapon is that, amongst many of the other things that Guntuna has presented, this is a very reasonable submission. It's definitely something that the AdMech would need to facilitate non-Titanic sieges, and it is arguably what I would call a low-risk strategy. I mean, this is a creature that can generally squeeze along below the ground at a relatively decent clip. It's certainly not going to be outrunning any vehicles, but it will outrun infantry, and then in addition to that, it has the ability to defend itself. Now, naturally, void shields do not work underneath the earth, but once it emerges above ground, much like the weirworms from Lord of the Rings, it can certainly protect itself from anything but the most heavy of Titanic bombardments. So, there is not an easy way to catch this thing out, as it were, other than to provide it something that might damage its internal mechanisms. But, barring that, and let's be honest, who's preparing an underground mine for the giant Ordinatus weapon, this is a pretty efficient weapon. And, of course, there is the other thing that this is a substitute to Titans when it comes to knocking down hive walls. I could see this being used relatively commonly, even though, of course, it is not a weapon that would be available to many forces. Rather, it would be used relatively consistently because it doesn't cause that much damage in comparison to something like a Warlord Titan. So, pretty good overall from this Guntuna submission. Next up is Guntuna's other submission. Yes, we are pairing them up. The Psycho Null Engine. The Psycho Null Engine is an anti-psyker unit equipped for single elite automata kill squads within and throughout the AdMech, very similar to how assassins work for the Inquisition. Essentially, a powerful null is stuck inside of a semi-autonomous construct, and then it is effectively thrown at an enemy. I very much construe this with something similar to the Men of Iron. 2.5 meters tall, with a neurostatic transmitter essentially designed to project the null wave effect of the creature inside to try and damage the nervous system and or kill creatures. Naturally, it would be most effective against psychers, but for things that it is not effective against, it has big old servo claws, which are not a bad weapon by any means. Then, of course, it has the mix of shields that is standard for Guntuna, his construct shields that we discussed before, ceramite and adamantium armor in a coffin arrangement. There are a couple of things that I like about this. First of all, it's acceptable in small numbers, which of course is the design here. It's not a mass squad unit, it's not even as common as regular automata for the Adeptus Mechanicus. Because individual nulls are quite hard to come by at this strength, the addition of the neurostatic transmitter and the armor make it a very good touch. We want to preserve the quote-unquote pilot for the Psycho Null Engine as much as physically possible. The only concern that I've really had for this one is not having a longer ranged weapon, and the sanity or usefulness of the pilot, and whether the AdMech would be negatively affected by it. I mean, adding in something as simple as a Cognis heavy stubber on the shoulder would probably make this more effective, because it means it can't just be overwhelmed by light infantry. And of course, there is a much larger problem, and that is that perhaps its logistical uses or its logistical weight might be affected by the fact that the structure itself and the pilot may negatively affect or afflict other Mechanicus units. Now, nulls don't have a devastating effect upon normal people. They can be dangerous for sure, and the neurostatic transmitter can certainly be lethal, at least at close ranges, but let's be real, nobody likes being around nulls. They are absolutely miserable creatures, and modified or no, I would have to wonder whether or not tech priests would be comfortable around the Psycho Null engine for any amount of time. It's one of those reasons why I kind of align it more with the assassins for the Inquisition. They may perhaps be kept on ice, as it were, and then thrown at a psyker when needed. So overall, very good. I think a tiny little adjustment could make it far better. Next up is a unique one from Horus the Great, the Hegemony Caste. The Hegemony Caste are a unique combination faction. It's one of those things where we get to take a lot of ideas from other fictions and put them into 40k. It's a mix of Red Rising, the Combine, and the caste system from real life. This faction is a hierarchical, pseudo-human, tech-devouring one. It works off of a caste system where a group of humans and semi-humans work and worship for a pair of pseudo-deities able to devour Xenos and synthesize technology as quote-unquote gifts for the hybrids and abomination lower classes that feed them. It's a very arguably destructive system that consumes the foreign and creates blessings for the underclasses. It has a heavy emphasis on gene modding and hybridization, both of genetics and technology from consumed races. The golden, top of the pyramid, represents the Hive Queen and the Venerated Ancient, kind of similar to a god or a demigod with a universal set of overlords to the others. Now, the way that this was described to me by Horus the Great was basically a combination of the way the orcs worship Gork and Mork, kind of an idol worship thing where more and more people worshiping the male side of their hierarchy empowers it, and then on the other side you have this inherent psychic being or creature, similar to something like a Norn queen, that would organize and essentially structurize the hierarchy of the Hegemony Caste. Now, I really like this. I'm a big fan of adding this kind of function into 40k. When it comes to kinetic concerns, however, concept-wise, theory-wise, this is a very good idea. Consuming other species, hybridizing their technology, incorporating abhumans and subhumans and mutants into your ranks, all good things if we have a good psychic lock on them, like with Gene Stealers. But with the kinetic concerns, I need to bring in some questions. Where? How do they deploy the Hegemony Caste? Where are they belonging? Do they have a separate position in space? Do they have a separate planet? Do they operate out of a space hulk? Do they operate out of some sort of base? How? How exactly does their hive mind and their broken down hierarchical system function? Wherefore and how do these individuals represent themselves within the hierarchy, and why does it hold together? Is it a psychic affectation? Is it mind control? Is it pheromones? And how long has this faction existed? If they're new, that's my main concern. If they're new, where did they come from? If they're old, I think it's more understandable, because very much like a lot of human civilizations left to rot on their own, as it were, they tend to turn to unhealthy methods of coping. And Hegemony Caste, to me, at least, looks like a very unhealthy coping mechanism for one of the cast-off civilizations of humanity. However, if they are old, the best way to slip them into 40k lore would likely be to slot them into some sort of derelict sector, perhaps deep in the Ghoul Stars, or an unexplored area of the Western Reaches. Moving on to another Horus the Great idea and yet another crossover, the Antediluvians. The Antediluvians are a vampire masquerade meets 40k faction. A central group of primordial quote-unquote vampires, more realistically I would term them perpetual psychers, similar to a weaker version of the God Emperor. They regenerate or are reborn over generations, becoming progressively more insane and weaker. Naturally, we know that psychers tend to perhaps lose a bit of their sanity over significant amounts of time, and perpetuals also can have major swings and changes in their personality as well. Now, the first few generations, of course, as with the actual Antediluvians in Masquerade lore, keep their secrets of resurrection while slowly losing the vast majority of their psychic powers. So whatever abilities the original Antediluvians had have either been slightly diluted over time, or the later generations simply won't inherit them. As a faction, they secretly increase their numbers and seek out the originator mummies, the original Antediluvians, in hopes of improving their process of rebirth and regeneration. Now, I don't really dislike this, again, because I am all for the idea of crossovers as long as they are lore friendly, but there's a bit of a problem here when we come to the Antediluvians. Just shifting something like vampires into 40k and shifting them in as psychers or perpetuals leaves some more problems. When were these creatures birthed? Were they similar to the Emperor? Are they more like any other number of perpetuals? Are their psychic powers inherent or are they gained? Where do they operate out of? I would imagine that piracy would be something that is relatively common with these folks, kept in little covens in the void. And I could definitely see them operating in that way. The how, as far as how they would fit into 40k, these mummies, these Antediluvians, these originators of this vampiric line would certainly be pirate lords. Now, I don't think that they could fit in very well on Imperial worlds for a great many number of reasons, but more primarily because they would look nothing like a human being. So you could argue they fit in like gene stealers. That is possible. Certain if they are psychers, they would be possible to cover their own tracks. But I think it's more likely that these Antediluvians would end up as pirates and creating little voided covens out in the far distance in order to cover up their existence. So, on to a lovely one, something that was honestly put in as a good pick for the back end. Potential Plateaus Leech Imps. Now, the Leech Imps are a unique micro-collective demon engine of Khorne pulled from Darkest Dungeons, which honestly I love. They're made on the same architecture as Ecclesiarchy and Adeptus Mechanicus cherubs. They are small, semi-servitors, organized with simple, near-mindless collective operation, designed for terror tactics by Khornate cults. Now, we all know the truly eldritch horror of the fact that the Imperium that grows babies and then turns them into servitorized creatures. Remind me again how these are the good guys. So this is merely a way for Chaos to modify that same architecture into something that pleases the Blood God. Now, this is a two-party system, with a single demon's essence broken up into several leeches, the various mechanical bodies of these creatures, and then driven into buzzing madness. They rip open armor and use a specialized proboscis to suck out blood. Quite quickly, I might add, and they have the ability to drain an armored human in a matter of seconds if there are 2 or 3 of them on the target. They are, however, difficult to tame and to organize. They are used to terrorize ahead of the main assault. Like I said, when these things are released, it's very much like a horde or a swarm. Perhaps you have 5 or 6 bloodletters. You use them to make 24 to 30 of these leech imps. Then you release them in a large wave ahead of your attack. They are fast, they are small, they are semi-mechanical, and they are quite aggressive. They will stun the enemy, they will cause battle shock, they will kill several individuals, and their grotesque way of actually doing their killing makes them far more effective at breaking enemy resolve and making your resultant charge and your subsequent charges far more effective. This is a wonderful engine idea in my opinion. It's similar to a better version of Harpies or Furies, with their metallic parts and their slightly more controllable essences having multiple demons broken up into different engines. I do wonder if their size makes them prohibitive for Corm demons, or if they're just relatively unstable. I could definitely see something this small that requires the demon to break up being a single-use thing. Essentially, you summon, you break the demon up, it doesn't like it, but it goes along with it for the moment, it sucks out a bunch of blood, it's please Corn, it leaves the engine. Most of these engines are too small to sustain the level of runes, spells, powers, etc. that would be required to do a long-term binding for that kind of demon, and the other problem is, if one part breaks and it has to leave, the rest of the essence may break as well. Now, I'm not saying that killing one leech will cause an entire horde of them to break apart, but it does mean that for every second that leeches get downed, it's likely that the whole essence of the creature would wish to return to the warp, possibly weakening them over time, and or more likely making it far more difficult to sustain large swarms of them over distance, and especially if they had casualties. On to one that I've been looking forward to since our last homebrew video, Hypnotismo's Yellow Belly Command. Now, this is an expansion on the isolated mongrels / copper thieves chapter from last homebrew. It is a specialized, quote-unquote, elite remediary unit for specific types of space marines to engage in close cooperation with elite chapter serfs with good guns. Now, I put that in quotes for a reason. The mongrels, or the copper stealers, are incredibly limited in both numbers and in materiel. They have to make up for it some ways, and the Yellow Belly Command is an example of that. It's a solution to low numbers. A brother with less than impressive courage in the face of the enemy, essentially a cowardly marine, is put in charge of a unit of around 100 or so elite human troops or serfs. Supposedly, they're chosen for having good logistical services, intelligence services, and interactions with mortals. In reality, it's more like a pairing of mortals who can be trusted with marines who can't, which I really like the idea of. Now again, beyond just my love for Chaos Marines, this is a great example of how you write and how you create believable loyalist chapters. If you want to talk about people who have a flaw, don't make it a flaw in the gene seed. Make it flaws in the people themselves, because I'm very tired of people treating Space Marines like they're not human. They have flaws. Cowardice is one of them. Now, I'm not saying that they're so cowardly as to deserve the title of yellow, but I am saying that there are some Marines who work better with friends to expose and friends to be rid of, so to speak, rather than having all of the authority and all of the boldness levied upon themselves. I love the overall idea of the Yellow Belly Command. You're putting disgraced or ancillary cowardly Marines in a position of smaller Chaos Space Marine warbands, which is an awesome idea. You're essentially forcing them into the same privatized connection with mortals that you would expect of Chaos Marines. I mean, in the Loyalist terms, they're still expected to work with the humans, but in this case, the humans are all they have. There is no other squad to work with them. Now, there may only be like 1,000 of these humans and probably only 10 Yellow Belly commanders, so to speak, but that's still quite a few more elite troops in terms of mortals than are available to a lot of Loyalist chapters, and it helps the Copper Thieves or the Mongrels make up for their low numbers. What's also important for them is that because the Mongrels are so strapped for cash and equipment, these mortals, much like the higher levels of cultists in Chaos warbands, can be trusted to give over anything they find on the battlefield back to their liege lord, which is very important. On to a lovely one, Bone Man's Gehenna ATVs. Now this is honestly one that I know Bone Man wanted to do in the last homebrew, but we're doing it now. So this is a sister-coated Taurus with impressive drip, doubled up medium support weapons, built for speed and to support faster moving mechanized or airborne sisters elements. Essentially, where rhinos lack firepower, it does not, with the addition of being relatively inexpensive and relatively light. It's not a tracked vehicle, it doesn't have a massive engine, it has space for troops, space for heavy weapons, and more importantly, it's not all that expensive in comparison to a full-on tank. Now, it has lower armor, bulletproof glass in some cases, but more importantly, some steel bodywork somewhere in between 40 and 80 millimeters thick. I would argue more on the side of 40, possibly even less. Of course, because if you have exposed glass, you can expect for the vehicle to be relatively lightly armored, but that is not a guarantee in 40K, of course. It does have a reinforced chassis with what I call a headless, quote-unquote, turret design that's pretty smart for a manned dual heavy weapon station. Now, of course, we all like to make fun of the Space Marines for their stupid little floaty things that have the Marine's head between two heavy weapons. This is what it should be. A headless turret, aka an autonomous turret, where you have a sister standing up inside of the back of the vehicle and controlling this weapon suite with her shoulders and back, shoving her head into essentially a heads-up display and giving her the ability to target the weapons outside of the vehicle without leaving it herself. Now, this doubles up on the sisters' classics, both armor penetration and anti-infantry. Twin multi-meltas, which, to be honest, I think you need to get dangerously close to the enemy in order to use, but also, let's be real, these are Sisters of Battle. They are 100% behind getting too close to the enemy in order to use a twin multi-melta effectively. But in a more realistic phrase, we have the twin autocannons. Twin autocannons and twin Ministorum missile pods are both going to give you some good anti-armor, anti-infantry punch. And then if you want true dedicated anti-infantry, twin heavy bolters and twin heavy flamers will give you far more firepower than any vehicle short of tanks that the sisters have available. Once again, in a light, relatively cheap, relatively fast pattern that can keep up with airborne or with mechanized troops. So as you might expect, overall this is a spectacular addition, and honestly a friggin' need for the sisters. Mechanized troops' pain and their downside is a lack of mobile suppressive firepower. This directly fixes that problem, and it does so without being incredibly expensive or incredibly complicated. It uses no unique technology, it is literally a sisters-coded Taurus. It uses no unique components, it uses weapons that the Sisters of Battle use already. So it is practically the perfect solution to a primary issue for the faction. They need heavy weapon support that is better or faster than man-portable, and that can keep up with their mechanized or airborne troops. The Gehenna ATV fits this problem and fixes it perfectly. So well done, Bone Man. As one might expect, Bone Man did not leave us there. He has an Anzac unit. Yes, of course, the Aussie gives us an Aussie unit. Are we surprised? And this one is quite Australia-coded, might I add. It is an Iron Harvest Bushranger concept. So, this is an Iron Harvest special exo-infantry units with steampunk aesthetics designed to be a special assault and forward force scattering unit. They utilize several pieces of specialty gear, and may I just say, what an aesthetic, genuinely, and what good art as well. So, we have the Scorpion grappling hook. I have my concerns about this thing, but they were quickly dashed when I looked through the actual goal. This thing is not designed for pulling the entire creature or pulling the entire exosuit. Rather, it is designed in conjunction with the legs to give it a remarkably long jump effectively. Now, while that may be humorous, it's also incredibly heavy. So the Scorpion grappling hook is a lot closer to turning yourself into a human wrecking ball than it is, you know, a good old-fashioned Tom Cruise mission Mission Impossible grappling hook. In addition to that, it has arguably its most important piece of kit, a quad-barreled scatter rifle. Now, this is basically a quad-barreled shotgun, similar to the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse. It has fragmentation and burst shells designed to quickly scatter or destroy masses of infantry. Generally, this is good versus structures for the same exact reason that burst and fragmentation grenades are good against structures in general. It is worse against fellow exo units and against heavy armor. Now, it doesn't have any designated armor-piercing rounds, but fragmentation is not useless against other exos. Even though this is a heavily armored exo, there are still vulnerable parts of it that, like any other Iron Harvest gear, can be damaged by fragmentation. But pure fragmentation and burst shells are less effective than real armor-piercing ammunition. In review, I would say it's a great build in terms of Iron Harvest, specifically that setting. Lots of extra mobility and the quote-unquote kangaroo jumps that it has with the augmented legs, and the quad barrel firing at the same time with frag and shell is peak. This is definitely a shock assault unit. I could very much not see them holding a defensive position. That seems like the opposite of what they're meant to do. Now, I also love the armor. It is heavy and quite Ned Kelly-ish, especially if you look at this bottom image here. That is some black pot iron there, ladies and gentlemen, and considering that it's very Ned Kelly-ish, it also doesn't protect the thighs all that much. Who saw that coming? Let's hope nobody with a shotgun is hiding behind a tree. But other than that problem, this is a lovely design. I love the art, I love the concept, I love the idea of having these specialized shock troopers with specialized weapons, specialized equipment, but they don't skimp on armor. Now, you know me, I'm an absolute simp for some well-armored heavy infantry, and yeah, this does kind of tickle my fancy quite a bit. So let's move on to Wallflower. Now, I've split up Wallflower's actual submissions because I wanted to talk a little bit more about their next one. Now, this is the Kurnos Free Companies. This is a very unique army. Now, you could call it a regiment, I think it's arguable, but it is a Boxer Rebellion-inspired force regiment or army, essentially made up of mixed rogue trader retinues from the Kurnos Expanse. These are forces owned by various rogue trader families, sometimes traded or lifelong mercenaries, compiled and organized into a single heading or quote-unquote force, and it is the definition of free companies to hire. So you have this entire organization within the Kurnos Expanse of organized, professional, expansive, and lent-out rogue trader free companies. Now, these usually come in three flavors. Masses of cultist-like cannon fodder, armed with autocannons, armed with autoguns, but relatively well led. They have talented officers at the very least, even if their quality of weaponry is not very good. That same good leadership, then, is provided by veteran retinue members and ex-guardsmen. Those are the most elite, the officers in charge of these various free companies. Many times these will be ex-guardsmen or they will be veteran retinue members for a rogue trader. The third flavor is elite forces. Usually these are well supplied, acting as either private bodyguards or as stormtrooper equivalents. Now, as one might expect from a force this varied, including all different types of guns for hire, of various levels of specialty, wealth, origin, background, talent, etc., they're going to have a very wide breadth of what we call stormtrooper equivalency. The best examples here that Wallflower, of course, has kindly provided is the Austro-Hungarian army, and then also the Boxer Rebellion. You have people of 9 different nations fighting together. Different ethnic groups, different patterns of weapons, different backgrounds, different planets, perhaps even different dialects of Low or High Gothic spoken among them, but they are all organized into these companies for hire. Banding together various smaller private armies into a collective pool of hireable and experienced individual has a lot of advantages, but it is also mentioned that they're affected by infighting between rogue traders. Now, of course, mercenaries don't often care who they're actually fighting against. If it happens to be Imperial citizens, who cares at a certain point? Now, I'm not going to say that they would go out of their way to be violent or cruel to fellow Imperials, but let's be real, if one rogue trader wants another group of Free Company dead, they would certainly be happy to hire their own Free Company mercenaries to go and do the job. So, I love the idea. It's got some great potential to it. I could see many, many useful applications for this type of force. Another lovely one from Hypnotismo. Now, these are the Malice engines. Yes, Malal finally creeps his evil for evil's sake way into the homebrew. These are demon steeds of Malal, or Malal, morphed and cajoled into a physical form to long-term add to the glory of their minor deity. Now, usually these are in the forms of steeds or minor demons that are molded into a vehicle. Motorcycle, ATV, golf cart, whatever it may happen to be. They have a mild and relatively progressive fear aura that grows as the engine goes up to medium plus in power. Now, the main thing with this is that these steeds, these creatures, don't want to be steeds. They're not necessarily willing. Now, it's beggars can't be choosers indeed, but they are definitely pulling off of it for their deity. So, beggars can't be choosers. The idea of a reverse siphon, the idea that the engine is pulling suffering out of real space and into the warp because their deity can't necessarily feed directly upon it if it's not powerful enough, is both novel and fun. But this is made much better by the limited and progressive fear aura, which works really well with these vehicles. For a creature of this level, where it's from a unnamed or a questionably extant deity, having something as basic as a fear aura not only makes sense, but as Hypnotismo explains, when the demon levels up, essentially becomes more powerful, becomes a better version of the vehicle that they are, or you draw in a larger creature to make a vehicle out of, the fear aura becomes more palpable and more powerful, which I think is very good for an engine of this type. On to another one from Bone Man, the Necromorph Skin Bat. Now, I have not looked at Dead Space in a long time, but this is a Dead Space Necromorph, a modification of one. It is designed as a fast-moving melee and harassment flyer with a mix of silent wings and very strong momentum attacks, designed for striking down or wrapping up human-esque sized foes. As you can see, detached jaws, massive skin-like wings, bat-like toes. This thing's a fucking nightmare. It requires more resources, and it's seen as unnecessary for the normal operations by the markers. The markers are the things that create the necromorphs, for lack of a better term. And for normal operations, they're not really necessary, but there are also variants of them that have a specialized sonic screech known as the Flare Bat. Now, these are really cool, and I overall think that they work great for Dead Space. You know, the idea of modification, all these things, changing the bones, changing the flesh, the meat, changing its arms and bones to make wings out of it is very, very cool. It certainly fits the Dead Space aesthetic to a T. I also like the fact that it came with some beautiful artwork. So, very good job, Bone Man. I am a big fan of your skin bat. Honestly, I think that's a really fucked up thing to say. I am a big fan of your skin bat, Bone Man. Well done. I would say one important thing about this is if it costs specialized resources, you should compare it favorably with other creatures of that type. I know that there are some very powerful necromorphs from the Dead Space series, and I think that the skin bat honestly could just be the Flare Bat without any of those modifications or variants. It could use that upgrade as a base level. On to what I call Rad Rat Review. So this was a series of submissions from Rad-a-Rat, or Rad Rat as I'm going to call him. This is Rad Rat Review Time, or Rat Review Time. several different submissions came in, and they all had such beautiful artwork and wonderful backgrounds that I could not turn them down. We have several of them in a row. First off is the Boiler Man. Now, I'm not going to read the whole thing. You can go through and pause if you'd like to, but I'm going to read my review out first. I love the vibe of the Boiler Man for various reasons, beyond the obvious loreful ones of the Iron Hand successors finally having some decent traders, because God knows we don't get enough good Iron Hands traders in their successor chapters, but the isolation of talent to me, the idea that you're taking a Tech Marine effectively and then bringing them into this very, very like power nugget type of development in the Boiler Man is important. The way that weaponry is appointed for these elite forces, and they have various types that are from like Xenos or from trades or specialized equipment. They're almost like destroyers for the Necrons. My only concern with these elite forces is treating them like frontline troops rather than logistics troops. I would imagine that a unit this important that knows this much about technology and development, even if they're fully crazy, would be very, very important. You gotta have somebody with the skills of a Tech Marine, and the Boiler Man, or the Boiler Men, seem to have that level of technical skill. So amongst the Emperor's Children, I think they should be valued a little more than a line breaker frontline unit, but that's up to argument there. The Mimic. The Mimic I love. I like the concept of polymorphine meets the Obliterator virus. It's a mix of units that are designed to essentially amalgamate, similar to a doppelganger. The progressive degradation of this unit over half a century, ignored by egocentric Marines, is a good touch. The idea that they're slowly losing their mind and losing their grip on their mutations is awesome, and the fact that every single Emperor's Child thinks that he's just him and has the ability to bypass the natural madness of their malady makes a lot of sense. I especially love the idea that once their infiltration days are kind of over, once they've broken, they've become mentally unfunctional, they become those kind of flash mimics or quick mimics. They become like Spawn. Melee only, but they're weirdly good at it. Their mix of polymorphine and the Obliterator virus let them make things like orcish muscle or demonic limbs or Eldar quickness, and they can switch between these at incredibly high speeds. Now, that makes them a deadly melee combatant, but it also makes them completely unpredictable, which is one of the reasons why I compare the Flash Mimic to something like a very good Chaos Spawn. But overall, quite impressive, and honestly a little bit depressing considering how many of the Emperor's Children must have fallen to this pseudo-disease. The Comedians. Now, I got the Comedian as one of the original send-ins from Ratarat, and I've gotta tell you, to be honest, this is one of my favorites. I love the Comedian. Literally a laughing, gas-toting Emperor's Child former apothecary, and that is some wild work. Apothecaries for the Emperor's Children are already fucked. Ones who have gone completely mad with dark humor and edgy gallows humor are even worse. They are nihilistic. They are giggling to themselves. They're making fake jokes like they're on stage at a stand-up concert. They have edgy gallows humor. The angle that comes from the blight, the fact that this comes from the Ancient Legion's curse is wonderful. And their service alongside a more deadly force, in this case the Cacophoni, the sound terminators of Slash, also makes a lot of sense. Apothecaries would want to keep those Marines around, and of course, given the fact that they have some limitations in terms of what units they can engage, the Comedians would be following along with the Cacophoni. The Terminators can deal with anything that the Comedians can't, and the Comedians have the effect to essentially drop a bunch of laughing gas on the enemy, collect all these bodies on their backs, use them as a constant quote-unquote audience to listen to their jokes, but I would also make a great suggestion here. On top of the lacrimal toxin, the hallucination gas that is basically like laughing gas that they use to kind of immobilize their victims and then make their back trophies, TP3 would be great for these guys. If you don't know what TP3 is, it is highly acidic gas. used in the 40k universe. It's essentially like mutagenic acid or something else. It's an airborne or a slightly heavier than air acidic gas. It can melt its way even through tanks given time, and I think that the comedian having their primary weapon be a grenade launcher on top of the lacrimil toxin, they should also have at least a couple grenades of TP3. This would simply allow them to deal with armored targets far more easily, and also to kill a lot more units, including vehicles. Finally, for the rat review, we have the Virtuoso. The Virtuoso is fucked. Quite frankly, it's a glorious input. I love it. Once more, this is great background, going all the way back to Brother Nolus for the Istvan V massacre. It's got a wonderful combination of gravity gun for immobilizing the painting supplies, enemy units, and then lasher tendrils for painting and removing their pigments. It's a great idea. The idea that you take a mental screenshot of the battlefield and then you need to continue fighting to get enough paint and get enough material to actually make the artwork that you saw in your head is incredibly Emperor's Children, and it's beautifully conceptual. I could really see small numbers of these guys doing murals because their augments their ability to immediately kind of take a screenshot in their head of whatever they're looking at so that they can make a perfect rendition of their art would make them very good for logistics. Their ability to take perfect remembered photos of a panoramic battlefield, their ability to use their weapons in a very judicious way, and of course to keep themselves alive long enough to finish the portrait are very important as a whole and really do scream Slaneshi Marine, far more obsessed with getting their job and their primary purpose done than they are with being effective on the battlefield. They're in fact incredibly willing to kill allies if their allies happen to be quote-unquote in frame at the moment that the mental picture was taken. Now, one more thing, Wallflower's Echelons. This is the last one, I believe. Yeah, this is the last one for today. Now, I'm going to straight up freestyle on the Echelons because I love them. This is a corrupt contenders faction. What's even more than that, it's a corrupt contenders faction for a loreful campaign. The loreful campaign is the Sabbat Worlds Crusade. So, back in the day, the Echelons had basically no lore. They were a named but nameless chaos cult within the Sabbat Worlds Crusade. They were allied with the chaos forces aligned with the Sabbat Worlds, but they were in no way fleshed out. We had mentions of them as an individual cult. We had no detail of them whatsoever. Wallflower has taken it upon herself to actually flesh out this cult entirely. Has created Alucard, who is pictured, who is their demagogue, has created and organized their actual backstory, and has walked through many of the actual story beats that this character and the character that she embodies has created. They were an absolute rock bottom failed cult, fleeing from the Forge world of Ermune when they met with some unfortunate, or rather unforeseen, allies, a Fraction Iron Warriors warband, the Sons of Olympia, also referred to as the Dust. Now, the Dust were there in their own way kind of a fractured warband. They were not loyalists, but they were simply Iron Warriors who had outright rejected Perturabo. They were individuals who were left behind during the obliteration of Olympia, and they managed to flee and escape the Legion as a whole. And their long period of history had seen them allied with many less than perfect individuals. And they could somewhat identify with the Echelons. The Echelons are a cult from a very, very rundown Forge world, and they have some very interesting cultural crossover that Wallflower has built on. So, for example, the Iron Warriors are often known for their demure demeanor and rather being quite serious and dour and down to earth. The Echelons, as an extension of Ermune's culture as a whole, are inherently quite stoic. They are severe, they are deep, they are intentionally emotionless mindless in a way that is fairly unique to people who have had their souls broken by the deep industrial overuse of the Adeptus Mechanicus. And so there are ways that this cult, in effect, have crossed culturally with the Iron Warriors, perfectly of their own accord, I might add. So this is, again, an extension of the Sabbat Worlds Crusade, something that I'm currently doing in my own game system of Corrupt Contenders, and it is going quite well. Now, as a homebrew group, there are a lot of details to the echelons. They are working towards becoming a guard quality unit. They're certainly organized, disciplined, trained, and battle-tested enough, as they have been defending Ermune and attempting to take it back for basically almost half a century at this point. They are very experienced, and they have the Iron Warriors to back them up. It's a great example of a more symbiotic relationship between a cult that is relatively small and a warband that is relatively small. They can work together without one dominating the other. So, a lovely shout out to the echelons. And that is it for this video. I hope that you enjoyed. It's been an absolute pleasure. Now, I did mention at the beginning, and of course you will remember Sigma art for our thumbnail, but I did mention at the beginning that there was going to be more videos coming soon. Specifically, not only because I've been streaming a bit, but also because I've been going out of my way to detail some things for those guys. We have the challenge coming up soon. Now, the challenge includes a lot of people's different homebrews. It also includes a lot of people getting actually rated and critiqued for the things that they made. If you have noticed, I have chosen a winner for this contest. I won't tell you just yet who it is, but there is one, and they'll be notified when they need to be. But I will also be doing more critiques in the next video. I've been doing pure reviews for this one, and it's been almost all good things so far. So, I'm super excited. I'm so happy to be celebrating our anniversary. Our channel has reached an insane amount of subscribers, and I know that it will only continue to get better. Your homebrews are so appreciated. Once more, save what you have for our next great channel milestone. And I wish you all a lovely good night.